Hello, BookTube, and welcome to a little read-along that I'm doing with Matthew at Mayberry Book Club of Brideshead Revisited by Evelyn Waugh. This is probably his most famous novel, and it's the story of young Charles Ryder, who we meet. He is the son of, the bourgeoisie in London who goes up to Oxford and meets a young man named Sebastian Flight, who is beautiful and fey, and who is the scion of a younger son of a noble family that lives relatively nearby, driving distance away from Oxford. And they live at a place called Brideshead Castle. And through his association with Sebastian, Charles eventually gets to know the whole family. And falls in love. I don't think there's any violence being done to Waugh's story to say that he falls in love with Sebastian. It's a kind of love, as we're going to see. And today we're reading the second quarter of the book today. We broke it up roughly into 4 parts, and we're reading the second quarter today. Actually, this weekend. I'm late making this video. We left Charles and Sebastian in Elysium. We left them, didn't we, baby? We left them at Brideshead, alone and in each other's company, as close to paradise, Charles Ryder says, as he's ever had on Earth. And you just know, with a writer like Waugh, whether you know a lot about Waugh or not, you know that that is a setup for a fall. That you can't have paradise without an expulsion. And that comes in the 80 pages that we're reading today. And it comes in metronomic beats. Charles Ryder says it was a series of catastrophes that befell Sebastian. And it also comes in the same device that happens over and over again, which is the adult world intruding on Charles Ryder. In the first 80 pages that we read, that happens only in 2 ways, and they are both so bizarre that they're easily dismissible. One way is Charles Ryder's venomous, hilariously acidic father, who doesn't know how old his son is, doesn't like his son, and makes no pretense of hiding that, and really doesn't care what happens to Charles Ryder one way or another. And the other isn't really that old. It's Brideshead, Sebastian's oldest brother, who is the heir to the property, and who is only, we're told, a couple of years older than Charles and Sebastian, but seems of another generation entirely. And Brideshead he's a prig. He's a bit of an oaf. He's no more immediately, empathetic or likable than Charles Ryder's father. And the only other figure that represents the adult world in those first 80 pages is Charles's cousin Jasper, who gives him all sorts of very pompous rules for how to behave when he goes up to Oxford. And then later, when Charles has broken all of those rules, he's fallen in with Sebastian's set of day-drinking sons of aristocrats. Jasper issues his great remonstrance, where he reads Charles the Riot Act about how he himself has become a laughingstock because of Charles's eccentricities, because of his excesses. When it comes to cousin Jasper, Charles Ryder, we're reading all of this is him looking back on these earlier years, 20, 15 years earlier. And he says that as far as he knows, he never consciously took any of Jasper's advice on anything, and he seems somewhat proud about it. And with his father, there's this weird animosity that obviously doesn't lead to sympathy whatsoever. So the adult world, I guess you could say the adult world tries to intervene with Charles and by extension Sebastian in the first 80 pages, but it fails. That isn't true anymore in the second 80 pages. Charles Ryder, and maybe by extension Sebastian, are destined for disillusionment. You get a sense in the first 80 pages that the main author of that disillusionment will be a character that I think is one of the most enigmatic and fascinating in the book, and that is Lady Marchmaid, Sebastian's mother. But it doesn't happen quite that way in the 80 pages, roughly 80 pages that we're reading today. Instead, the adult illusion dispels dispelling happens from other people. Uh, because we start off this 80 pages with Charles and Sebastian going to Venice to see Charles's father, Lord Marchmain, who is uh, in voluntary exile from England. He doesn't go to his native country anymore. He lives in Venice with his mistress Cara. And Charles and Sebastian goes all the time. He is, we are told, his father's favorite son. But Charles has never been before and is overawed by the whole thing, and a little bit put out, because keep in mind this is an 18-year-old we're talking about, by the prospect of meeting someone's mistress. He tells us that at this point he was entirely innocent of women and could not with any certainty recognize a prostitute in the street. And when he meets Cara, Lord Marchmain's mistress, he doesn't encounter what he expects. He encounters a thoroughly decent and upstanding Italian woman. She's not a figure of the demi-monde. She's not a figure of social disgrace. She's well known in the piazzas of Venice. She's greeted and cheered by all. And she is eager to take the boys in and do some sightseeing with them. And we get a wonderful little moment where she unearths a tiny Italian nobleman to whom all doors are open, and they are unflagging tourists. And Charles Ryder says that it's an ecstatic experience, that he was drowning in honey, stingless. But there comes a day. He also meets Lord Marchmain. He meets Sebastian's father, who he says had a Byronic air that he was at pains to suppress, that his exterior of normality was a carefully maintained illusion, that there wasn't anything really normal about him, although Charles notices that he has the family charm and the family beauty, that his voice and face are Sebastian's. But there comes a moment in this visit to Venice when Charles gets what I would consider to be his first real disillusionment at the hands of an adult. And the thing that makes it effective is that it's not done through condescension or anger. It comes from Cara. There comes a rainy day when they are alone. He's alone with her. And they have a conversation that I want to read to you just a bit of, because it is so beautiful. This book is so beautiful in its expression, in its adulthood. How it doesn't pander, it doesn't talk down to you at all. It assumes you have the same sophistication that it does. Sebastian had gone to play tennis with his father, and Cara at last admitted to fatigue. We sat in the late afternoon at the windows overlooking the Grand Canal, she on the sofa with a piece of needlework, I in an armchair idle. It was the first time we had been alone together. "I think you are very fond of Sebastian," she said. "Why, certainly. I know of these romantic friendships of the English and the Germans. They are not Latin. I think they are good if they do not go on too long." She was so composed and matter-of-fact that I could not take her amiss, but I failed to find an answer. She seemed not to expect one, but continued stitching, pausing sometimes to match the silk with a work-bag from her side. "It is a kind of love that comes to children before they know its meaning. In England it comes when you are almost men. I think I like that. It is better to have that kind of love for another boy than for a girl. Alex, you see, had it for a girl, for his wife. Do you think he loves me?" "Really, Cara, you ask the most embarrassing questions. How should I know? I assume." "He does not. Not the littlest bit." "Then why does he stay with me? I will tell you. Because I protect him from Lady Marchmain. He hates her, but you can have no conception how he hates her. You will think him so calm and English, the milord, rather blasé, all passion dead, wishing to be comfortable and not to be worried, following the sun, with me to look after the one thing that a man cannot do for himself. My friend, he is a volcano of hate. He cannot breathe the same air as she. He will not set foot in England because it is her home. He can scarcely be happy with Sebastian because he is her son. But Sebastian hates her too. Now there I'm sure you're wrong. He may not admit it to you. He may not admit it to himself. They are full of hate of themselves, Alex and his family. Why do you think he will never go into society? I've always thought that people had turned against him." "My dear boy, you are very young. People turn against a handsome, clever, wealthy man like Alex. Alex is Lord Marchmain. Never in your life. It is he who has driven them away. Even now they come back again and again to be snubbed and laughed at. All for Lady Marchmain. He will not touch a hand which may have touched hers. When he has guests, I see him thinking, have they just come from Brideshead? Are they on their way to Marchmain House? That's the family's home in London. Will they speak to me of me to my wife? Are they a link between me and her whom I hate? But seriously, with my heart, that is how he thinks. He is mad. And how has she deserved all this hate? She has done nothing except be loved by someone who was not grown up. I have never met Lady Marchmain. I have seen her only once. But if you live with a man, you come to know the other woman he has loved. I know Lady Marchmain very well. She is a good and simple woman who has been loved in the wrong way. When people hate with all that energy, it is something in themselves they are hating. Alex is hating all the illusions of boyhood, innocence, God, hope. Poor Lady Marchmain has to bear all that. He loved me for a time, quite a short time, as a man loves his own strength. It is simpler for a woman. She has not all those ways of loving. Now Alex is very fond of me, and I protect him from his own innocence. We are very comfortable. Sebastian is in love with his own childhood. That will make him very unhappy. His teddy bear, his nanny, and he is 19 years old. She stirred on her sofa, shifting her weight so that she could look down on the passing boats, and said in fond, mocking tones, how good it is to sit in the shade and talk of love. And then added with a sudden swoop to earth, Sebastian drinks too much. I suppose we both do. With you it does not matter. I have watched you together. With Sebastian it is different. He will be a drunkard if someone does not come to stop him. I have known so many. Alex was nearly a drunkard when he met me. It is in the blood, you see. I see it in the way Sebastian drinks. It is not your way. And Waugh doesn't beat this over the head, but it's clear that the conversation really gets to Charles. It's not over-dramatized. It's not made into a melodrama the way it would be with a contemporary novel today. Instead, it's lodged in him and in us as readers. And later on, Charles admits it himself. There's a scene not far off where he says, it was during this term, when they go back to Oxford, that I realized that Sebastian was a drunkard in quite a different sense than myself. I got drunk often, but through an excess of high spirits, in the love of the moment, and the wish to prolong and enhance it. Sebastian drank to escape. As we grew together, older and more serious, I drank less, he more. I found that sometimes after I had gone back to my college, he sat up late alone, soaking, that is, just quietly, methodically drinking in silence, often in darkness. A succession of disasters came on him so swiftly and with such unexpected violence that it is hard to say when exactly I recognized that my friend was in deep trouble. And the succession of disasters will be very recognizable to 21st century readers. And it has a simple term. It is alcoholism. I mean, Waugh dresses it up. This is a very, very arch and romantic book. I think that's why so many critics didn't like it. Still knowing for all that. And I think the critics who said that the knowing Waugh of all of his other novels is absent in this book are just wrong. They're just not seeing it. This is a very knowing book. But it is very arch and very Baroque. And if you strip that away, what you see is simply that Sebastian Flyte is an alcoholic. Takes to hiding drink. Takes to long periods of drinking alone. Takes to drinking to escape as a crutch, psychological, and as the word comes up in the pages that we're reading today, chemical. That's the main difference here. It's not this Byronic crushed innocent. It's just an alcoholic. We would approach the subject, I think, probably very differently today. But the way that that Lady Marchmain and the family approached the problem in this period, in the interwar period, is in a way that, as Charles Ryder said, is guaranteed to make it worse. They start to guard Sebastian. They start to lock up the drinks at Brideshead. They start to appoint him a tame Don named Mr. Samgrass, an odious, poisonous figure, who's always cheery and has wormed his way into the good graces of Lady Marchmain, and who exalts in his wormy kind of supercilious way in the power that he has over Sebastian. Naturally, he becomes a figure of deep hatred, and could, I guess, be seen as another intrusion of adulthood here, because he has power even though he's contemptible. He still has a great deal of sway over what happens to Sebastian. In the course of these pages, he becomes basically Sebastian's keeper. But I don't consider him that way, because he doesn't really have a whole lot of agency of his own. As Sebastian says to Charles Ryder, he is someone of mummies. He's the thing. He's a tool. And Lady Marchmain, in her own way, she is very studiously not made to be a villain, but in her own way, she wants to make Charles a tool as well, of controlling Sebastian, of saving him, in her opinion. But no, I don't include Mr. Samgrass as another intrusion of adulthood. The other intrusion of adulthood in these 80 pages is a character named Rex Mottram, who is the betrothed, the intended of Sebastian's sister Julia, who is a crucial player in the second half of the book, and who is very much like Sebastian, but very much not. In the course of the book, Charles Ryder falls in love with both of them. As Lord Marchmain comments in a later passage, he seems to have a fondness for my children. There are 4 Marchmain children. There's Brideshead, there's Sebastian, there's Julia, and there's little Cordelia. And in the course of the novel, we get to know all of them with a tragic detail. But Julia brings this fellow Rex Mottram, a big, confident, swaggering city financier type, big in conservative politics, with the fur-lined coat and the ready expertise on all subjects, knowing just who the key person is to talk to in any scrape, and knowing just what the key player is in any situation. As he often says, it's just the kind of thing I hear. Rex Mottram is not at all like any of the aristocratic, attenuated blood bows of Julia's acquaintance. He is, one suspects that's why she's originally fascinated with him, because he doesn't so much care for her aristocratic background. In fact, part of the awakening that he gives to Charles in his own installment in these 80 pages is to wake Charles up to the fact that the world is changing, and that Julia's set, her aristocratic families, are in for a rude awakening. He tells Charles at one point in the conversation that I'm alluding to here that they are overdrawn £100,000 in London alone. That they keep the Marchmain house all going with servants all year long in London. That they keep the property all going in Brideshead Castle, all going with tons of servants, including plenty of servants who have aged out of service and are being attended by other servants. Plus, there's Lord Marchmain's establishment in Venice, a whole palazzo. All of that is a huge expense, and they don't ever raise their rents. They don't work their money. Rex Mottram is always saying that he makes his money work for him. And he comes in very handy right after we meet him in an incident that always sticks out in the reader. When people read this book for the first time, it always sticks out. There is an incident where there's a party. Julia has told the boys that they have to come. Rex Mottram is there. The boys decide they are bored with the party and slip out to go to Mom Mayfield's, because one of Sebastian's schoolhood friends, a feckless aristocrat named Boy Mulcaster, who's the son of a nobleman, and just a squitchy, just an awful, oily figure. He thinks they should all go to Ma Mayfield's in the Old Hundredth because it's obviously a den of prostitution. He thinks that would be more sophisticated, more cool. And they do, and they get rip-roaringly drunk. And when they are leaving with a couple of the prostitutes from Ma Mayfield's, Sebastian is driving the car and promptly gets it crossways, like that ship that was caught in the canal. Gets it crossways in the street, virtually under the nose of a couple of policemen, who approach and naturally want to know what's going on. And Boy Mulcaster makes the disastrous decision to mock the policeman right there at the scene. They might easily have been told to just go home and sleep it off. But Boy Mulcaster says, well, you would come from Ma Mayfield. Obviously, she pays you a great stipend to look the other way. Why don't you go ahead and do that? The cops, of course, arrest them. And it bids fair to be an enormous scandal, because it's not just Boy Mulcaster. It's Lord Marchmain's son who's been arrested. That's a huge deal. And in comes Rex Mottram, who handles the whole thing, and does so with such efficiency that we can't help but think that it increases his standing with Julia. Then there are all sorts of mishaps. Mr. Samgrass loses control of Sebastian a couple of times. Sebastian eventually is given into the control of Rex Mottram, and Rex Mottram loses control of him as well. He is determined to escape from his handlers. And at one point, in the wake of Rex Mottram losing control of Sebastian, he has Charles Ryder to supper, a fairly elaborate supper in a fairly nice restaurant, and talks to him. And it's another intrusion of the adult world in Sebastian's innocence, in Charles Ryder's innocence. It's another way of that innocence just being chipped away. Because Rex Mottram might be an oaf and a bore and a bully, but we get the strong sensation that he knows what he's talking about. And when he talks about how the family is on financial rocks, we have no choice but to believe him. He says, I don't mean they'll ever be paupers. The old boy, that's Lord Marchmain, will always be good for the odd 30,000 a year. But there'll be a shake-up coming soon, and when the upper class gets the wind up, their first idea is usually going to be to cut down on the girls, meaning cut down on the settlements for their daughters in marriage. I'd like to get the little matter of a marriage settlement, though, before it comes, which is Rex Mottram telling the truth but being odious about it at the same time. He isn't obviously all that much in love with Julia. It's immediately obvious in just a few pages in his acquaintance that he has a mistress, and that what he wants is what he can get out of the Marchmain family, monetarily. But he has, in the course of this supper, he has a lot of these things to say to Charles, and in a great device that Waugh uses throughout that scene, he has Charles constantly retreating into the refinement of the meal itself to get away from Rex Mottram. We'll get a little chunk of Rex Mottram talking about the way things are, and then Charles will retreat into the deliciousness of the food, or in this case, the refinement of the wine. Rex Mottram says, do you have any idea? He asks Charles, do you have any idea how much they're overdrawn? Charles said, of course I don't. And Rex Mottram says, jolly near 100,000 in London. I don't know what they owe elsewhere. Well, that's quite a packet, for people who aren't using their money. 98,000 last November. It's quite the kind of thing I hear. And Charles thinks to himself, those were the kinds of things he heard, mortal illness and debt. But then Charles retreats into the wine. I rejoiced in the Burgundy. How can I describe it? This is a long paragraph, right in the middle of a conversation. How can I describe it? The pathetic fallacy resounds in all our praise of wine. For centuries, every language has been strained to define its beauty and has produced only wild conceits or the stock epithets of the trade. This Burgundy seemed to me then serene and triumphant, a reminder that the world was an older and better place than Rex knew. That mankind in its long passion had learned another wisdom than his. By chance I met this same wine again, lunching with my wine merchant in St. James Street in the first autumn of the war, reminding us that although we're firmly in the scene with a young Charles Ryder, this is all being remembered by an older Charles Ryder. It had softened and faded in the intervening years, but it still spoke in the pure, authentic accent of its prime, and that day, as at Palliard's with Rex Mottram years before, it whispered faintly, but in the same lapidary phrase, the same words of hope. That comes out of nowhere. It's a long paragraph that is, on the surface, self-indulgent. And it signals a tone change in the book. In the second half that we're reading, if you're reading along with us, you're going to notice that seemingly self-indulgent, longer paragraphs, longer passages like that become more common. The first half of the book was gorgeously romantic but succinct. Waugh is a genius for succinctness. And he abandons it in large part in the second half of the book, where we're going next time. We're going to read the next 80 pages. Aren't we, baby? You are not, because you don't know how to read. You don't know how to read. But that's all right. You have a lot of skills they don't have. You just don't know how to read. That's all. You certainly know how to speak. She talks a lot. She's a human would consider her a very quiet dog, but she talks a lot. Not as much as my Basset Hound did, Lucy. Lucy talked all the time, but it was babbling nonsense. Lucy was Mary Todd Lincoln. Frida talks a lot, but anyway, we're gonna notice that. I'll point it out to you in next week, and especially in the fourth week of reading this book, that longer and more ecstatic passages start to crop up, and they are, again, in my opinion, astonishingly beautiful. This is an astonishingly beautiful novel, which as much as I love pretty much everything else that Waugh wrote, including all of his other major novels, I don't think you can say that about any of the others. I think that was a thing that he was especially going for in this book. And when you go for that, it's because it's easy to mock, it's easy to be embarrassed about. And Waugh was preternaturally sensitive to embarrassment. Which we could do a whole other video on the critical reception of this book and Waugh's later critical assessments of it himself. But one way or another, that's where we land now. Darkness is closing in all around. It is clear that there will not be a happy ending for Sebastian. He knows it himself. Says, I don't plan on doing anything. The family will do everything. I don't have to do a thing. I will just keep running and running and running. In the pages that we're reading today, that's metaphorical, but in the next 80 pages, it becomes very literal. I mean, it's literal in these pages too, because every time he's given a caretaker, he gives him the slip. But it's going to become more obvious that that is Sebastian's future. And Charles Ryder has a different future of his own, and it is very much involved still with the Marchmain family. It is very much involved with these children, only not with Sebastian. So we'll be getting into that next week. I hope you're all enjoying this. I'm having a ball rereading it in detail. One of the nice things about having a read-along of any kind is that you get to reapproach these books. I don't often get invited to read-alongs. This was Matthew's idea. Don't know if he's regretting it, but I'm having a ball. So I'm gonna wrap this up for now because I am clearly being summoned. But I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.